Well, welcome to the Bellevue City Council meeting for this beautiful evening of July 19th, 2021. City Clerk, could you do a roll call, please?
Sure. Mayor Robinson.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse.
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson.
I'm here.
Councilmember Stokes.
Here.
And Councilmember Zahn.
I'm here.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Stokes, could you please lead us in the flag salute?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. City Clerk, do we have anybody signed up for oral communications tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. There are 6 pre-registered speakers this evening. And with that, I will call the first person, and that is Reverend Patty Ebner. And Reverend Ebner, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, thank you. Your time begins now.
Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse, and esteemed Bellevue City Council members, thank you for your service to the Bellevue community. I am Pastor Patty Ebner, a member of the Eastside Interfaith Gathering and pastor for Congregational Care and Outreach at the First Congregational Church of Bellevue. As many of you might remember, our congregation has hosted the rotating shelter of Congregations for the Homeless for more than 2.5 decades and is committed to advocating for those living and struggling on the margins of our community. Our voice was one of the voices which contributed to the 4-3 vote modifying the Land Use Code Amendment, which has made possible the building of permanent shelters and day centers to be sited and built on land in our community. I am speaking tonight on resolutions 9971 and 9972 and asking for your affirmative votes on each of these resolutions. In my perspective, providing day and permanent shelters places those experiencing homelessness in a more structured environment where relationships can be built with others experiencing the same set of issues, and relationships which provide accountability to a community which has found itself outside the mainstream and is struggling to barely hold on. Additionally, providing permanent supportive housing will support hardworking individuals in this area who cannot otherwise afford to live in the community they serve. Providing them a way to live in the community which exists, in part because of their contribution to it, seems to be a fair exchange at a minimum. Additionally, permanent supportive housing will provide the necessary services to address issues which are direct causes to their chronic homelessness. In my role as a pastor, I am often contacted by individuals experiencing homelessness and in need of other services as well. 3.5 years ago, I heard testimony after testimony stating, "Not in my backyard." And here we are tonight. The land is chosen, the proposals made. Please pass resolution 9971 and 9972 so we can move forward, not as individuals, but as a community who cares. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Ebner. The next speaker on the list is Ann Osterberg. And Ms. Osterberg, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Okay, great. Mayor Robinson and members of the City Council, as a Bellevue resident, I appreciate this opportunity to speak in support of Resolution 9972, authorizing the final supplemental funding needed by Plymouth Housing Group's Eastgate Permanent Supportive Housing. I urge no delay given the years it has taken to get the Eastgate campus to the point of putting bricks and mortar on the ground. I ask that you approve the funding using the same ARCH conditions attached to the council's earlier April 12th funding award to ensure consistency with long-established standard conditions of public funder awards. Permanent supportive housing with rent subsidies and services is the best proven next step for the women and men exiting the Sophia Way and the congregations for the homeless shelters. This project, along with the rest of the Eastgate campus development, will be a significant benefit to the entire Bellevue community, our thriving businesses, and safe neighborhoods that we all desire to preserve and enjoy. I applaud the careful and thoughtful consideration each of you has given to the 3 projects in the Eastgate campus to date, and I applaud each of the sponsors for investing precious time and money through the lengthy pre-development phase. Now it's time to vote yes. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Osterbar. The next speaker on the list is Russell Joe. Mr. Joe, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, distinguished council members, I'm Russell Joe from Republic Services. I'm here to speak on the Environmental Stewardship Initiative 21-539 tonight. But before I do that, I wanted to thank the city and 4 council members for coming out to our downtown litter walk on Sunday. Jared Neuenhaus did a great job kicking off the event, getting us into the streets so that we could do our job of cleaning up the downtown core. Janice Zahn did a wonderful job closing out the event, telling us about the environmental initiatives that the city is involved in. I'd also like to thank Conrad Lee and Jeremy Barksdale for attending the event. I also see Patrick Bannon from the Bellevue Downtown Association on the call tonight, and he and his daughter were also volunteers at the event, so thank you. There were 20 volunteers total, and we gathered 46 pounds of garbage during our litter walk. We were also able to get a full toter of recyclable items that we were able to divert from the landfill and put to productive use again. Thank you to the city for helping us coordinate the event. We look forward to working with It Is Overdue, a nonprofit, and Bellevue Green and Clean, a Facebook page, to make another one of these events possible in the future. With respect to the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, we at Republic Services have been meeting with Bellevue staff as part of this initiative. On June 23rd, we had a sustainability leaders group, and Republic Services is very interested in being involved in this because 5 of the areas that you put out, the 2 that are important to us are materials management and an increase in recycling. If you note from the report, recycling went up to 45%, trying to get to that target of 50% by 2030 in your goals. Residents have an easier access to recycling in their homes. That was part of the reason why the rate went up. We love the opportunity to have a collaborative atmosphere with our leaders and parties in the environmental area to exchange ideas and coordinate our responses to the environmental situation that is impacting Bellevue. Thank you very much for your time. And we want to make sure that this environmental stewardship initiative continues, and Republic Services wants to lend its support in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. The next speaker on the list is Stephen Norman. Mr. Norman, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Thank you. Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhaus, members of the Bellevue City Council, I'm Stephen Norman, the Executive Director of the King County Housing Authority. I'm here tonight to thank you for your support for the Illahee project, which is on tonight's agenda as Resolution 9973, and to urge your final approval. But equally important, to thank you for our longstanding and ongoing partnership in addressing the housing needs of Bellevue's residents. One of the most important aspects of this involves the preservation of existing lower-priced housing in Bellevue, thereby preventing the displacement of existing community residents. The Illahee is a striking example of this. The sales prospectus prepared for this property by the previous owner as it went to market noted that with minor property improvements, there was an immediate value add opportunity of $550 per apartment per month. A rent increase of this magnitude would undoubtedly have displaced most of the existing tenants, many of them immigrants. There are approximately 30 children living on this site. This situation is very similar, as a number of council members remarked at the last meeting, to what was occurring at Highland Village. The acquisition is part of KCHA's preservation initiative with the Amazon Corporation that has enabled us to purchase 7 apartment complexes with 1,084 units. Recognizing Bellevue's housing needs and the rapidity with which the city's existing inventory of naturally occurring affordable housing is disappearing, 6 of the complexes acquired with 924 units are located here in Bellevue. KCHA saw a unique opportunity with the Illahee to leverage new federal rental subsidies to further increase affordability at the site. Bellevue and Amazon's grant funding will enable us to leverage ongoing subsidies that will permit us to house extremely low-income households. The median income in our public housing program is approximately $13,000 a year, roughly 13% of AMI. Residents pay 30% of their income for rent and utilities, and the remainder of the rental cost is picked up by the federal subsidy. We are also very pleased to have entered into an agreement with the Bellevue School District and Youth East Side to prioritize homeless families referred by the school district. The district has already referred 9 families, 4 of whom have been housed to date. In response to a question that was raised by council last week, I want to reiterate KCHA's commitment, similar to the one we honored at Highland Village, to find the funding needed for rehabilitation activities elsewhere. We will not be coming back to Bellevue for any additional funding for this project. My deep appreciation again to the council, to City Manager Miyake and Deputy City Manager Behrens, to the Community Development Department, and to Lindsay Masters at Arch, a great partner. It is your willingness to work closely with us that has enabled not just the Illahee, but a long line of successful partnerships to move forward. I look forward to seeing what more we can do together to serve the housing needs of Bellevue's residents. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Norman. The next speaker on the list is Patience Malaba. Ms. Malaba, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Your time begins now.
Good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. For the record, I am Patience Malaba, Director of Government Relations and Policy at the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County. I'm testifying tonight in strong support of resolutions 9971 and 9972, both authorizing the city manager to implement an agreement for the CFH East Side Men's Shelter Project in the amount of $3.5 million and the Plymouth Housing Group's Eastgate Permanent Supportive Housing Project in the amount of $400,000. I urge your yes vote on the resolutions with no delay. This, as you well know, is funding that is urgently needed in response to unprecedented rising construction costs that are being experienced in projects right now due to several factors. The swift action that you have taken to adopt the supplemental funding recommendations and one that you will take tonight on the resolutions is a critical step in the right direction. So tonight, I want to thank the mayor, council members, the city manager, staff ML King, Lindsay Masters from Arch for the swift action and sense of urgency in helping close the funding gaps for the 2 projects. We commend your leadership and work that recognizes that rising homelessness on the East Side cannot be ignored, and that fully addressing homelessness requires a multifaceted solution to meet a wide array of needs. We know that it will take all of us working together to address the homelessness crisis with the speed and urgency that the moment demands. I urge you yes votes on both resolutions to move the projects forward with no delay. Thank you again for your diligent work towards identifying solutions to address the entire spectrum of housing needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malaba. The final speaker on our pre-registered list is Jared Axelrod. Mr. Axelrod, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Your time begins now.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and members of the council. My name is Jared Axelrod, and I lead local public policy with Amazon. I wanted to speak briefly in support of 3 of the items on your agenda this evening related to the city's efforts to address housing and homelessness in Bellevue. Specifically, we'd like to offer our support of resolutions 9971, 9972, and 9973. Together, these 3 items represent a good investment in addressing the challenges of homelessness and housing affordability in Bellevue and across the East Side. First, we wanted to applaud the hard work being done by Congregations for the Homeless in their efforts to establish an East Side men's shelter in Eastgate. We urge your support of Resolution 9971 and also would like to thank the council for your efforts over the years to support CFH and establish this important space on the East Side. Second, we also wanted to support the efforts underway next door to that space with Plymouth Housing's work to establish a permanent supportive housing project and urge your support of Resolution 9972 as well. And finally, we support Resolution 9973, authorizing $4 million to help King County Housing Authority acquire the Illahee Apartments in Bel Red. As you know, the Illahee Apartments was one of the first projects funded out of Amazon's Housing Equity Fund, which we announced this past January. And now Mr. Norman just spoke eloquently about the benefits of this project to the Bellevue community, so I won't belabor the point, except to say this, and that is this commitment by KCHA, the City of Bellevue, and Amazon truly represents a public-private partnership to preserve this existing and much-needed low-income housing in our community. And I'd like to thank you for working with all stakeholders on this item. So we urge your passage of these 3 important projects this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Axelrod. That is the end of our pre-registered list. And we have reached the maximum 3 comments for resolutions 9971, 9972, and 9973. If there's anyone else connected to this call who would like to make a comment regarding a different item, please use the raise hand function or *9 if you're connected with a phone. And Mayor, I do not see any additional hands.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Miyake, you have a report for us tonight, right?
Yes, I do, Mayor. Yeah, I have one item under the city manager's report to report out on this evening, Mayor and council members, and that is an update on the recent 4th of July fireworks show. Joining us this evening is Patrick Bannon, the president of the Bellevue Downtown Association. They sponsored this event, as well as Michael Shiosaki, director of the Parks and Community Service Department, who played a significant role in supporting the event. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. Patrick?
Well, good evening, Mayor Robinson, members of the council. It's a privilege to be here tonight to share a few details about the Bellevue fireworks, 4th of July fireworks show, which was just a really amazing example of collaboration of a team hard at work behind the scenes, supporting a huge turnout on the 4th of July. So Michael and I are just going to speak to a few points, again, extending our thanks to our teams, as well as the partners who made the 4th of July possible here in Bellevue. A couple highlights that we wanted to note. One is that it was a beautiful night, extremely lively atmosphere as the crowds turned out in the downtown park. In fact, based on our analysis and communication with the city's team, we're gauging this as a record-breaking crowd, which speaks to, I think, the energy and the enthusiasm community members had in coming back together. This year was a modified celebration by design, where in past years, over the past 2 to 3 decades, we've had a live music component. We've had activities for the family, as well as other partner-related activities that have been throughout the day. So this year was just a fireworks-only show, which coincided with our understanding of where restrictions may be, also in providing a safe environment for those attending. It was an example of a powerful collaboration, one that we have a legacy of working closely with the city of Bellevue on in producing the event, but also in the private partners who have been consistently supportive of this type of celebration and the size of celebration. So again, special thanks to the City of Bellevue Parks and Community Services Department, the fire and police departments, and our presenting sponsor, the Bellevue Collection. You may know the Bellevue Collection provides the site for the fireworks launch, but they also provide all of the parking on site. And this year it was open and free to the public after 7 p.m. And then we had 4 very significant supporting partners this year who helped us fund the event and make it viable. And they were Amazon, Microsoft, PACCAR, and Puget Sound Energy. Again, just a tremendous show of support in a very short time frame. Our attendance numbers, this is in collaboration with the City of Bellevue, we're estimating there were about 65,000 people in the park itself, and then on the perimeter of the park. And then if we take into account surrounding neighborhood viewing, viewing from hotels and office towers and other peripheral areas, that we could get a number of up to 80,000. There's no way of knowing precise numbers because we don't take attendance. There's no way of knowing a lot about our crowd except for the anecdotes of walking around and seeing that people were enjoying their time here in downtown Bellevue on the 4th. But we did ask a few people about their testimonials, very common themes about enjoying the opportunity to get together, love seeing families enjoy one another and in conversation and reunite with neighbors and get to know other people in the community. Earned media this year was obviously newsworthy based on the significance of the event and the only major fireworks show on the east side this year. We sent out news releases, the city sent out news releases. We did very little promotion outside of that, yet the earned media was there come event time, and certainly the crowd showed up. We ran a thank you ad just to acknowledge the partnership and the community support in the Seattle Times the following weekend, thanking our partners in the Bellevue community for their commitment, leadership, and care. Again, a significant gesture for the community to come back together and speaks truly to the collaboration between the BDA and the city. This is a shot that was done by Kamari Olson with the fire department and gives you a scan of the crowd as it's viewing the finale of the fireworks in the downtown park. You can see the mini cell phones lift to the sky to capture the fireworks in that finale moment. So it was an overall very safe event, grateful for the way it came together and that it turned out so well. So we hope to see you again next year. Plans are underway for the 2022 show and looking at ways that we can always improve the experience, improve the collaboration and partnership. With that, I'd love to turn it over to Michael Shiosaki for a few notes and anything I may have missed in the overview.
Great, thank you, Patrick, and good evening, everyone. So, just in case you weren't able to be at the 4th, so this scene behind me, this was downtown park, just as the sun was starting to set. And, it was just great to see so many families and friends together enjoying themselves in the park as they waited for the big show just after 10. And I think a good time was had by just about everyone. As Patrick mentioned, there was an extremely short timeline to pull the event off. And I'll say the staff from the BDA and the city really came together quickly to pull off what was truly a team effort. So on behalf of the city, big thanks to our partners at the BDA and very much appreciate the support of the City Council. A big thank you to city staff in Parks and Community Services, our program manager, Cindy Shelton, and especially our colleagues with police and fire. About 165 city staff were involved in planning, setup, working at the event, and takedown. So just a really great 4th of July event in Bellevue. So until next year, thank you very much.
Is that it, Mr. Miyake?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was so struck by it. That concludes my report this evening. Thank you, Patrick.
All right. Terrific. Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes. We have two study session items, and on the first one, Councilmember Zahn is going to recuse herself. So we will say goodbye to you, Councilmember Zahn, and text you when we are done with our discussion.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce this?
Sure. So thank you, Mayor Robinson and council members. The first out of two topics on your study session agenda is the Human Services Commission's recommendations as they relate to the use of the city's HB 1590 dollars. Just by way of background, a percentage of the city's HB 1590 dollars can be used for the operations, delivery, or evaluation of 1, behavioral health treatment programs and services, or 2, housing-related services. This matter was last in front of the council at your May 10th, 2021 meeting. At that meeting, council directed staff to work with the Human Services Commission to release a request for proposals for the HB 1590 funds that could be used for behavioral health and housing-related services for housing stability. Tonight, you'll hear from both staff as well as the Human Services Commission regarding the recommendations for this funding recommendations. After the presentation and council discussion, staff is seeking direction on preparing an ordinance regarding the Human Services Commission recommendations. Joining us this evening is Matt Cummins, the Director of our Community Development. I believe Tony Esparza is here this evening, Assistant Director of our Parks and Community Service. Alex O'Reilly, Human Services Manager, as well as from the Parks and Community Services Department, and Michelle Klein, the Chair of our Human Services Commission. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mac, to begin the presentation.
Hey, thanks, City Manager Miyake. Mayor, members of the council, it's good to be back with you this evening. It feels really interesting to be at this point. We've only been working on this program for about 7 months now total in earnest. We've been working through a variety of different components of the 1590 overall work program. And just as a way of introduction, we'll talk a little bit about tonight is going to be about the Human Services Commission's recommendations around how to spend some early wins money out of the 1590 pot. But I think it might also be worthwhile to talk about the overall program and where tonight's action fits in. The council will recall that you get about updates every 4 to 6 weeks or so on the overall 1590 program. There are really 2 major objectives for the 1590 work program, one of which is to create or preserve affordable housing for 0 to 60% AMI individuals. And there are very specific populations that are allowed to do that. And the other, as City Manager Miyake mentioned, is to spend some monies, but no more than 40% on the operation, delivery, and evaluation of human services and mental and behavioral health treatment programs. So we've somewhat parsed those 2 buckets out, if you will, and we're bringing them to you separately. As we've had our conversations with council, you've all indicated pretty unanimously that you would like to look at as many early wins as possible for the populations that these monies are allowed to be spent on. And so as a result, we're bringing you the capital separately from the human services components. So tonight we'll be focusing in only on the human services part. And a quick refresher for council, at your most recent study session on this topic, when you authorized the putting out of the RFP, we talked to the council about dedicating 20% of this year's revenue towards these human services and then holding back the 80% remaining for the capital fund. There's going to be a significant discussion next week as we talk about the overall 1590 work program and how the funding of the creation of those new units and or subsidies is going to work going into the second 2 quarters of the year. So the specific ask tonight of the council is to give staff direction to bring back an ordinance which would effectuate the grant monies of the early wins here for human services. And so at the end of our presentation, we'll be asking council specifically to do that. We're putting up this slide here to remind everyone in the public that there are very specific requirements for 1590 and what the monies can be spent on. I'm going to hand it off here in just a second to Alex O'Reilly, and then she and the chairperson of the Human Services Commission will walk you through the evaluative process for the RFP and the commission dialogue, informing the recommendations that you see in your packet here this evening. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Ms. O'Reilly, and she'll start walking you through the specific recommendations for funding tonight.
Alex, you're muted.
We can't hear you, Alex.
Okay, I hear. Thank you. Very sorry. I'll go back to my first statement. We're very grateful to the council that some of the funds from the new sales tax revenue just described were dedicated to supporting the housing stability of Bellevue residents through behavioral health and housing related services. This new source of funds will allow unmet needs to be addressed, and as we know, the need is significant, demonstrated by requests that more than doubled the amount of dollars available. These funds will make a significant contribution to keeping Bellevue residents housed and get the help they need for case management, counseling, and an array of other services. The commissioners work very hard to accommodate a very tight schedule to review applications and make their recommendations to council. They held an additional meeting in June to discuss the applications. They received 25 applications that were discussed during the 2 rounds of review. Of those, 19 programs that provided applications were recommended for funding. Of these, 7 were new programs. Our top priority was to emphasize equity. Here are a few examples of how staff and the commission centered equity within the allocation process. As you see here, we provided additional outreach to agencies that provide services to support Bellevue's diverse populations. We worked with Eastside for All and the Bellevue Diversity Advisory Network to send out the request for proposal materials to be sure that they were apprised of the opportunity. Grant writing technical assistance was provided to nonprofits representing communities impacted by systemic oppression. And commissioners reviewed equity principles and data prior to all of their discussions.
Alex, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second to say that the deputy mayor has recused himself as well. Both Janice, deputy mayor, and council member Zahn are board members of some of the providers that are being discussed right now. So they have both recused themselves, and I just wanted to let everybody know that. So please continue.
Thank you, Mayor Robinson. Okay. Of these, on this slide, we talk about the 5 agencies that were recommended for new programs to serve a population led by and for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Of these 5 recommended for funding, it represents a total of $357,425, which is 21.54% of all funding recommendations. Now I will turn over the presentation to Michelle Klein, who is our chair of the Human Services Commission, to make a few comments about what the commission considered in making their recommendations. Chair Klein.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for this opportunity to present to the Council the Human Services Commission's funding recommendations for the behavioral health and housing related services. We appreciate the Council's commitment to allocating a portion of this new revenue source to behavioral health and housing related services, which are so needed in our community. The Commission has been given regular updates by staff about the dire need for behavioral health services in the community, especially for youth who are experiencing extraordinary challenges due to social isolation during the pandemic, and also for the diverse and often marginalized communities who have not been able to find these services in formats that meet their specific cultural needs. We're also very aware of the many households who are facing challenges because they can't pay their rent due to job loss, reduction in income, or illness due to the pandemic, and also the challenges experienced by those who are currently homeless, trying to afford the initial costs associated with housing. We also know that individuals and families experiencing housing stability desperately need supportive services such as case management that can connect them to these services. We believe these funds will make a significant impact for Bellevue's residents with these needs. The Commission has committed to an equitable application review process, keeping in mind the organizations run by members of the underserved communities and communities of color are often more trusted by the populations they serve. I want to mention that in addition to the 5-8 programs that Alex mentioned that are new and focused on these communities, the majority of the applications had a specific focus on BIPOC communities. We're also pleased that organizations were offered grant writing technical assistance to reduce barriers to apply for funding, and that this assistance was advertised with the help of Eastside for All and the Bellevue Diversity Advisory Network as a means to reach as many organizations as possible. We had one agency take advantage of this assistance. As stated earlier, the Commission's recommendations, including funding for 7 new programs, and 5 of them are led by and are for diverse and underrepresented communities. This helps us move forward with our commitment to centering equity and inclusion and increasing access to all residents. Overall, the Commission has had thoughtful and thorough discussions about each application. We submit these recommendations to you with the sincere belief that they reflect the intent of the funds and the needs of the Bellevue residents. On behalf of the entire Human Services Commission, I'd like to thank the City Council for your support in building a strong foundation for human services so that all Bellevue residents can thrive and reach their full potential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Klein. We would now be available to answer any questions that the City Council may have for us.
Thank you for that great presentation. And Chair Klein, thank you for being here tonight and for all the work that you do. Please stay on in case we ask some questions of you. Let's go ahead and start with Councilmember Barksdale. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you, Mayor. No questions, but just want to say thank you so much for the equity-centered approach to this and that support for bringing this back as an ordinance. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to compliment the staff for taking advantage of the opportunity that we have to do this, with this additional funding. And as you know, Bellevue has been talking about how do we build capacity. How do we provide more opportunity for traditionally disadvantaged and underrepresented population and communities? And, as an immigrant myself and person of color, I always realize it's very challenging to compete, with funding that, is never enough to satisfy lots of folks. So this effort that we are doing, that's breaking away from the traditional red tapes and requirements. And, your technical assistance in grant writing, that's a very good example how to enable people, who normally would not be able to compete. And the fact that you have 7 new organizations that are able to compete and benefit, this is amazing work. I mean, we started this when we went through the pandemic, we realized, the challenges is not, it's widespread, and how do we make it as fair, as equitable as possible? So I'm very, very, very happy. I'm very glad that we are doing this. So thanks and kudos for the Human Service Commission, and thanks for the staff. And I hope this will continue. Sets a great example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
I couldn't quite hear it. It kind of had a sound in there. Sorry. You did call me, right?
I sure did.
Okay, it didn't come through. Okay, appreciate it very much. I think it's very exciting. And second, the comments have been made already. One of the things that we've been talking about for a long, it's one of these things we've talked about a long time, and I think it's really good to have the opportunity to move in that direction, and particularly appreciate the work that the commission and staff have done, and the community, to make this a successful program. And I hope that this really does open our eyes and mind and heart to making sure this goes forward, not just in a particularly, it's good to have this done with this group and this particular opportunity, but what my hope is that this teaches us that this should be something we don't even have to brag about, because it's something we do in all of our work and in our funding in the future. So I think that's a real big step, and really excited about it and appreciate the work that everybody's done on that. So I'm very pleased and looking forward to the results. And I think one of the things that's interesting is this impacts the larger discussions going on in the region and in funding and other governmental programs. And again, I'm glad to see that Bellevue is stepping forward and saying, well, we can actually do this and do it in a way that really produces results. So thank you again very much, and looking forward to seeing the program go forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. I'll join my colleagues in saying I support this. I support bringing forward an ordinance, and I really appreciate the work of the staff and the Human Services Commission for helping us find the right places to place this early win money. I also want to call out how appreciative I am that the largest distributions subject or bucket area is the rental assistance, which is really important. And so really thank you for weighing all the different applications. I know it's very time consuming for the extra meetings. We couldn't do it without you. And yeah, let's move forward.
Okay, well, I too thank you all, and Chair Klein, you know, I think the Human Services Commission was one of the first groups to get back together during COVID, because we had to start distributing that funding. So you guys have been busy for a long time now, and we have relied upon you for your recommendations, and just really appreciate the work that you and your commission and the staff have done to help us reach out to our community. So here's another really good example of that, and I'm very appreciative. And I'm wondering, do we have any data, or can we get any data on how many people are going to be unable to pay their rent when the moratorium ends? And do we have any way to identify people, and can we help them apply to the county? Or I don't know, what's our plan?
I can answer some of that question, Mayor Robinson. Our plan is that we are very vigorously helping agencies know where to refer people for other services, as well as, for example, as soon as we have approval on these recommendations and the agencies that are receiving this funding are notified, we will help spread the word that these agencies will have additional funds eventually once the contracts are set up for them to apply for. The other question you had, I'm going to ask Tony Esparza to comment on, because she was doing some research, crunching the numbers on an estimate of how many people might likely be needing such assistance.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Mayor, for the question. Yes, we have been doing some research on that very topic, and you've raised that question for us before, so thank you for prompting it. So our estimates are based on the U.S. Census Bureau, their biweekly pulse surveys, and then an overlay of the Bellevue demographics done by our city demographer, Kate Nessie. And based on that, we would estimate that approximately 2,000 Bellevue households are considered very likely to be evicted within the next 2 months if the moratorium was raised. And approximately 5,600 households are considered somewhat likely to be evicted within the next 2 months when and if the moratorium is raised.
Wow, okay. So Mr. Miyake, are we gonna have a presentation on this at some point, or do we have a game plan?
I wanted just to mention, Mayor and Council, is that we are planning to bring forward, information on the use of the federal funding that we received, and we'll definitely cover this topic.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much. I very much support bringing this forward. So is there a motion to provide direction to staff to prepare an ordinance adopting the Human Services Commission's funding recommendations for 2021-22 behavioral health and housing related services funds?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move to provide the funding for council to give to the Human Service Commission as recommended.
Councilmember Lee, I heard Councilmember Stokes first, so I'll have you second if you wouldn't mind.
I don't mind.
Okay, all right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you very much. So City Clerk, could you please bring Deputy Mayor Newhouse and Councilmember Zahn back into the meeting?
Yes, I will, Mayor. Thank you.
And we'll just pause here for a moment till we get them back.
I'm back.
Okay, do we have our Deputy Mayor back yet?
Not quite yet. He is on his way back. He is back now.
Okay, great. Mr. Miyake, would you like to introduce our next topic?
Yes, Mayor and council members. The second topic on your study session agenda this evening is a quarterly update on the city's environmental stewardship initiative. Just by way of background, as part of the adoption of the Environmental Stewardship Initiative Plan in December of 2020, Council directed staff to provide quarterly updates on the planned implementation progress and an annual update on our environmental performance metrics. The most recent quarterly update to Council was during March of this year, and tonight's presentation represents this year's second quarterly update. Tonight's presentation is informational, and we are not seeking any council direction, but we are open to answering any questions you may have. Joining us this evening is Matt Cummins, Director of our Community Development Department, as well as Emil King, Assistant Director, and Jennifer Ewing, our Environmental Stewardship Program Manager, again from Community Development Department. And also joining us is Anna Hagerup of our Resource Conservation Program out of our Finance and Asset Management Department. With that, I'm going to turn over to Mac to begin the presentation.
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. By way of quick introduction, and then I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Ewing, our ESI Program Manager. Council may recall that you asked for more regular updates on the Environmental Stewardship Initiative. And so whereas we used to report back to the City Council twice a year, we've now moved to quarterly updates here in 2021. And so this is the second of those quarterly updates. We're going to walk you through a number of things that we've been doing with the newly adopted ESI strategic plan, and also spend a little bit of time talking about the additional revenue and monies that the council appropriated in the budget and how that has been worked into the overall work plan. So overall, it's been a pretty exciting quarter here, and we're excited to bring some things back to you to talk about tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Ewing.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Cummins. And good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, and members of the council. We're looking forward to sharing our quarterly update with you this evening. Just to confirm everyone can see my screen okay before I get going?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. All right, so as Mr. Miyake mentioned, tonight's presentation is for information only. It's our second quarterly update of 2021. Tonight's update will focus primarily on the update on our performance indicators, but we'll also provide a quick overview of some of our accomplishments since our last presentation to council in March. So we'll talk about our community-wide environmental performance, looking at what happened in 2020, our city operations, talk about our accomplishments, and then provide an update on what we'll be doing next. So as was mentioned before, council provided direction for staff to provide quarterly updates on our work. As part of our plan update, the council provided direction on a suite of goals and targets for the 5 focus areas you see there. And then the image you see on the right-hand side is a snapshot from our online environmental performance dashboard. So all the data and information we'll present and talk about this evening is also on our dashboard, plus, some other kind of supplemental graphs and information, which we update every year. So if you want to go back or look at more information, that's all online at this URL right here. So as you remember, as part of the environmental stewardship plan update, we developed a set of recommendations for both our entire city and for our city operations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80%, transition to 100% renewable energy, move towards zero waste, et cetera. So all of the performance metrics we'll be talking about tonight really are the metrics we use to track our progress towards those goals. And again, this is all on our website. So, as you can see here, we tried to keep the list relatively concise, but it's still kind of a long list of metrics. But we really look at these as how we tell our story on how we're doing with respect to climate change, mobility and land use, energy, waste, and the natural environment. Most of these metrics, we do get updated data every year. I think we had heard a desire for more frequent updates, but most of this data is really annual data, so we can't do it any more frequently than once a year. And actually, an update of this magnitude once a year is, I would say, definitely best practice. There's a lot of cities that don't necessarily update their greenhouse gas emissions annually. So there are a couple of metrics where we don't have updated data for, say, some of our commuting information and that sort of thing, just because it wasn't available for 2020. But the key metrics that we'll focus on this evening, I think, are really some of the top priority ones for the city. So our greenhouse gas emissions, our vehicle miles traveled per capita, energy use, recycling, as Mr. Joe from Republic Services mentioned, and then the percent of residents living in a third of a mile of a park, which didn't change much. So you'll see on the dashboard that was attached to the agenda memo, we had a table similar to this, and you'll see some green arrows going up and down, and which is a little confusing. The challenge here is we have some metrics that, if the number increases, that's good. Like our recycling rate, we want that to go up. But for our greenhouse gas emissions, we really want that to go down. So we tried to, illustrate that with the arrows going in different directions, so essentially which way progress looks like, if you will. And so for this year, mostly everything is green, and other years it might look a little different. The key thing that I'll talk about a little bit more is that 2020 was obviously such an anomaly, sort of in all aspects of our life, and our environmental, performance was really no different. So just to, provide a bit of a reminder in terms of where our greenhouse gas emissions come from, they're really primarily coming from our energy use in our buildings and from transportation. And then some of the other sources really make up a much smaller percentage. So a lot of our work is really kind of focused more on our buildings and our transportation. So, the big story here is what was the impact of COVID on, in particular, our greenhouse gas emissions, but some of these other metrics that really kind of feed into our greenhouse gas emissions. So, you know, what we saw in Bellevue was similar to really other parts of the country and the world, that, you know, last year our emissions decreased 19%. So as, you know, the economy kind of shut down a bit due to lockdowns and that sort of thing, obviously that had a big impact on, you know, our driving and our energy use and that sort of thing. So what kind of drove these changes? And I will say, you know, of course, we are kind of looking at 2020 as an anomaly. I think 2021, since, you know, people are still kind of working from home and transitioning back into the office, is likely going to be a bit of an anomaly as well. So I think the real question is kind of, as we emerge from the pandemic, how might we sustain some of these emissions reductions while, you know, getting our economy going again. So some of the interesting takeaways here are, you know, we had a 31% reduction in per capita vehicle miles traveled. Our electricity use in our commercial buildings was down 22%. Not a big surprise, as, you know, a lot of office buildings in Bellevue were, you know, largely vacant or, you know, much lower occupancy than normal. One thing we thought was interesting was that, you know, despite, you know, the majority of people really spending a lot of time at home last year, the residential electricity use only went up by 4%. I would have thought that would have gone up by much more. So I think we're kind of interested in seeing, as people kind of venture back out to school and work, or working in an office, maybe there's more opportunity to reduce our energy use at home. And then, as Mr. Joe mentioned, our recycling rate went up a bit because it is a little bit easier to recycle when you're at home. Some offices don't always have the best setup for recycling and organics diversion and that sort of thing, which, you know, I think that's something our utilities department is aware of and tracking, but just interesting to see the impact of people shifting more towards being at home. So I'm going to hand it over to Anna Hagerup, who's our resource conservation manager, who focuses more on our environmental stewardship work for our city facilities and city operations. And she'll talk more about how our performance looked for our city operations.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you, council members and Mayor Robinson. We are really excited to present on our environmental indicators tonight, and we're really interested to see how the trend data played out in 2020 due to the pandemic. So we're excited to be here tonight and share those results with you. So as you can see here, for the municipal operations, we track about 9 KPIs that are associated with our environmental goals. And we're really just going to focus on the 5 that have changed since our last meeting in March. So on the left, you're seeing the charted trends since 2011. And on the right, you're seeing the arrows that are showing the increase or decrease since 2019. And then we've indicated in red or green if this is a positive or negative trend towards our target. So in 2020, we saw a 20% decrease in GHG emissions. The reduction in fleet fuel used and energy used in buildings contributed to this overall reduction. So you can see those two in orange and red. So the 25% reduction in building energy use and 18% reduction in fossil fuel use. The recycling rate, which includes both recycling and composting, it decreased from 70% to 60%. Mostly due to an increase in waste generation. And there was also an increase in water use at city-owned buildings, both in 2011 and 2019. So we'll kind of dive into those impacts in the following slides. Thank you. So looking at the next slide, what you're seeing here is the 2020 GHG emissions inventory that outlines the sources of emissions by sector. So as mentioned, there is a 28% decrease in GHG emissions, but the top 3 sources of emissions are still buildings, the municipal fleet, employee commutes, and air travel. So that is consistent with what we saw in 2019. The wedge for streetlights and traffic signals slightly decreased since transportation has almost completed the LED lighting upgrades. We saw a slight increase in the solid waste sector due to an increase in waste that's sent to the landfill, but composting emissions remain the same as 2019. Emissions from water infrastructure and fugitive emissions remain the same, so there was no change in this pie chart since 2019. But overall, the 76% of emissions come from our buildings, our fleet, and employee commutes. Next slide, please. So looking at kind of the COVID impacts, this graph really shows the GHG emission trends since 2011, and in green, you're seeing the current 2020 emissions total. Building energy is going to include electricity and gas, and so that increased by 25% overall and 6% since 2019. A lot of our buildings and facilities continue to support essential services at City Hall, BSC, our 9 fire stations and training center. Primarily our parks, buildings, and facilities were closed, but we had kind of a high level of occupancy both at City Hall and Bellevue Service Center. Our fleet fuel use also decreased by 18% overall, but by 40% in 2019. So this is the largest COVID impact that we've seen on municipal operations. Vehicles that remained in service were mostly to support essential services, but they were primarily occupied by one person just to promote social distancing. Emissions from employee commutes and air travel significantly decreased as well by 33%. This is also a large reduction, but this is primarily due to the fact that many employees were required to stay at home and telework. And there was a large reduction in air travel due to business. So there was a large reduction there. And as I mentioned before, there was a 10% decrease in recycling rate, which we think is largely due to the fact that there was increased cleaning protocols for vehicles and for buildings to promote safety. We saw a large increase in our landfill tonnage, but composting and recycling largely remained the same. Next slide. So this is the 2021 work plan that Jennifer presented to City Council back in March. So these were the high priority items that we wanted to implement to have the biggest impact as soon as possible. So tonight, really what we want to focus on is talking about our progress on what we've accomplished to date on this work plan. Next slide, please. So looking at our accomplishments to date, we applied for, or we were awarded an energy efficiency grant of $129,000 from the Department of Commerce at the state level. This is going to allow us to do lighting upgrades at 5 fire stations, as well as our Bellevue Service Center. It's also going to help us repair an HVAC system at one of our fire stations. So really, we're going to be doing 6 projects as a result of this grant. We're also working on a tree planting program through a donation that we received from Amazon. So that's something that we'll be implementing as well. Looking at our 2020 performance report, we've been recognized actually by the What Works City certification for our high level of excellency in data management and reporting on frequently to the public on this website. So that's something that a lot of work goes into managing our metrics and making sure that they're up to date and accurate based on the best data available. And then from the municipal operations side, we, as I mentioned, we're doing lighting upgrades. We've actually already completed lighting upgrades in all of our parking garages at City Hall. We have entered into contracts to do building tune-ups and improved air quality through the installation of MERV 13 filters at our highly occupied facilities. We also were awarded funding for EV charging stations. So they are not only installing charging stations at our Bellevue Service Center, but they're also providing a transformer that will allow us to install future charging stations. So that's a big win for the Bellevue Service Center. And then we've also purchased 2 new electric vehicles in our fleet. So we've done quite a bit to date so far, and I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer to talk about some of the community level accomplishments.
Great, thanks, Anna. So in terms of some other accomplishments from the natural systems side, we're really excited about launching our fall tree giveaway. We opened up the application for that, I think about 2 weeks ago. We're looking at giving away about 500 trees to Bellevue residents. Hoping to have enough trees for everyone who wants one, but if we get a little more demand than we have, we're going to really try to prioritize the neighborhoods that have lower tree canopy. We're also having our materials translated into simplified Chinese and Spanish, and so we're really looking at reaching a diverse audience with this program, which we're excited about. Also working with some of our partners through the Sustainable Bellevue Partnership to look for opportunities for tree planting on private property. So hoping to find some good locations in addition to our residents stepping up and planting trees, but also hoping some of our community partners will be interested as well. And we're already hearing some initial interest there. From the community engagement standpoint, we launched our Sustainable Bellevue Partnership. And so this is supported through the additional funding that council provided for enhanced engagement. So we had our Sustainable Leaders Group stakeholder organization kickoff in June. And then we just had a community town hall for our residents last week to share our progress to date, talk in a little bit more detail about our results from last year, and then also share some opportunities for both stakeholder organizations and residents to get involved going forward. And then on the energy side, we're excited about a new program that we're developing to provide technical support for commercial and multifamily buildings in Bellevue to pursue some early adopter incentives from the state through the Clean Buildings Act. So buildings over 50,000 square feet in Bellevue will be required to comply with some state energy efficiency requirements, but not starting until I think 2026. But the state has about $75 million in incentive funding to help buildings comply early. It's just commercial buildings that are going to be required to comply, but multifamily buildings can also pursue these early adopter incentives. So we're going to be bringing on a consultant to provide some engineering support for buildings in Bellevue and really looking at supporting both some commercial buildings and also hoping to get some affordable housing buildings, taking advantage of some of the state incentive funding. So we're working on getting a consultant on board and hoping to have a contract coming to council probably in September. And then, so what's next? Continuing work on some of the things we mentioned, getting the, like I said, the Clean Buildings Act technical support project underway. The tree giveaway is underway. We will be accepting applications until the middle of August. And we have, I think October 9th and 10th slated to actually distribute all the trees. We'll also be recruiting some volunteers to help us distribute 500 trees from Bannerwood Park. We're excited about that event. Also excited that we were sort of planning for worst case COVID wise, but thinking we can have a little bit more of an event still following COVID protocols, but can have a little bit of a gathering and be able to interact with residents. And then also, we will get started on a home energy retrofit program. And then on our municipal operations side, we will be starting a green fleet strategy after the grant is accepted from the Department of Commerce, moving forward with the energy efficiency projects Anna mentioned. And we are also hoping to pursue a solar grant from the Department of Commerce. So we're doing a little due diligence on that right now, and we'll hopefully be able to go after that one. So that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Council members on, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jennifer and Anna, for the presentation. You know, this is such an important piece for us in looking at our environmental and our climate goals and moving forward with our environmental stewardship plan. And I really appreciate the dashboard that was created. I think it's a really great visual and a start to really reporting and understanding what we have. And the information you provided about the effects of COVID, certainly what we're seeing is that transportation has come back. Anyone that tries to travel on 405 in the afternoon is right back to where we were before COVID. Although I realize that for the office piece, certainly both the city and the offices haven't all fully come back yet, so we don't completely understand what that looks like. And yet, as I think about what we have going on, and I really appreciate some of the early wins, I think about the fact that we need to move with urgency. And that's the piece where I'm a little bit concerned that, you know, as we look at the fact that 2030 is only 8.5 years away, what does COVID recovery and really setting ourselves up for success with the new normal look like? So how do we make sure that when offices and the workers come back, that they are carpooling or taking transit and not driving a single occupant vehicle, and that as the offices come back, their energy uses are not going to be such that we are going to see the return to the energy usage and the transportation. So for me, the question I have is, as we look at the 77 actions that are in our plan and the 2030, which is only 8.5 years away, I'd really like to understand a more holistic view of the work plan of how we're going to get there, and whether we have our own wedge analysis that's been developed that looks at of these different strategies and focus areas. How are we going to measure against our progress and say we are actually on track to meet that, or that our slope of progress is so slow that we are not actually going to make it by 2030. So I'd like to understand more about that, and whether we have the resources available to move us with the kind of urgency that we need, especially as we are going to be preparing for mid-buy discussions. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, you know, a lot of your questions are right on point in terms of how do we kind of sustain some of these reductions in emissions that we've seen. I think, you know, as we, in particular on the transportation side, we work with our transportation demand management program, you know, that works with both our employers, over 100 employees, and smaller employers on, you know, strategies for reducing or providing mobility options for people to commute to work. That's obviously a key piece. But then I think we're also looking at, you know, energy use in our homes and in our buildings. So I think those are really kind of two of the newer program areas that we're looking at developing with our home energy retrofit program and the Clean Buildings Act technical support. With the annual greenhouse gas emissions inventory, you know, we do use that to track our progress and see how we're trending. You know, COVID has kind of put us more on a path towards that 2030 goal, but we were making reductions up until 2019, but we were not quite where we needed to be. You know, and some of that is a lot of driven by, you know, we've had a lot of population and job growth. So we are trying to, you know, reduce our impact while at the same time, you know, focus a lot of growth in our growth centers in terms of both jobs and residents. So I think the next couple of years, you know, it will be really telling in terms of what our emissions look like. And then, you know, I think we are also looking at how we can engage with our community in terms of what actions they can take to reduce their impacts. So I think that's another aspect of what we're looking at through our programming.
I guess my main point is really being proactive, because it seems like there's an awful lot of actions here and lots of work to be done outside of the city with the community and the business partners as well as municipal. And it's not clear to me that we're moving with the urgency of actions and resources to get it done. There's only 2 of you, and there's an awful lot in that plan.
Okay, maybe we can move on to our next council member and we go back around. Councilmember Robertson?
Sure. No, this is a great informational item, and really pleased with the work that staff is doing. I know we set these bold, audacious goals, and we haven't achieved them all yet, but we are making progress in the right direction. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say thanks and keep up the good work. And I am looking forward to seeing how this tracks over time.
Okay, Councilmember Barksdale.
Great, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Jennifer. And I've lost, oh, Anna. So quick question, on the, you said the reporting happens annual, if I remember correctly, and just building on Councilmember Zahn's point, do we have any leading indicators that we can report on quarterly and get those data closer to organizations and people that can take action so that they can have better awareness of where we are and where we need to make improvements?
That's a good question. I think for the leading indicators, Anna, maybe you want to speak to that more for our municipal operations. I think for our city operations, yes. I think for the community side, that one is a little bit more tricky. But yeah, Anna, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah. So we rely on a lot of third-party agencies as well as different departments. We kind of consolidate and do calculations. So I want to clarify 2 things. One is that our emissions inventory is done annually, and that's actually a best practice for cities. But then we do have KPIs that we could potentially report on that are not necessarily related to emissions, but for instance, our drive alone rate. But that's something that is actually consolidated from another department that we report on under our umbrella of sustainability. So we only have so much control over some of our data sources and when we get that data, and that's why it makes it a little bit more feasible to do it once a year. So I think, but when we're looking at maybe the work plan and the actions that we're implementing, we could probably find some sort of indicator or KPI to indicate progress for that action. But to holistically do an annual GHG emissions inventory is really, we don't want to spend all of our time just reporting. We need some capacity to be actually implementing and getting things done.
Mm-hmm. I think one other thing, Anna, you could maybe speak to is for managing our energy use in our city facilities. I think that's, we get, I don't know if it's real-time data or it's really frequent. So, and Anna has dashboards to track all of that. So I think we are a little more able to manage in real time our energy use. And I think that's also what we're looking at supporting in the community through this Clean Buildings Act technical support. The first step in that program is to do what's called benchmark your building. So you get your data set up from PSE, you look at how you compare with buildings of a certain similar size and use, mm-hmm. and then you get that data, I think, monthly from PSE. So I think that's one thing where we do that for our facilities. We've been doing it for a while, and then there is definitely some buildings in Bellevue doing that, but we want to see more of them to help. So that would be sort of more of a leading indicator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we participate in PSC's My Data program, and we consolidate all of that in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is the national standard for reporting and benchmarking your buildings. So we do that for both electricity and for natural gas at all of our facilities, especially our ones that are occupied. And then we also report on indoor and outdoor water use, but that is quarterly because of because the billing cycle is every other month.
That makes sense. Thank you. And I definitely think it would be difficult to measure greenhouse gas emissions more than annually. So any leading indicators that sort of tie to it, building on what you mentioned already, would help us, estimate sort of where we can, where we are relative to the annual before we measure annually and can make adjustments. Last thing I was going to ask was if we could get that summary KPI chart in the dashboard. I like that chart and it's informative. That's all. Thank you.
Great.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor and Jennifer and Anna. Thank you so much for the presentation. A lot of good stuff there for sure. Appreciate the comments made about the dashboard. I think that's really great. Appreciate Council Member Barksdale's comments there about using other third-party data or outside experts. I mean, that was part of the reason why we created the enhanced stakeholder group as well. So I hope that going forward, we can take advantage of those experts in our community to help us with some of those leading indicators and data, and to make sure that we are on the right track. At least that was the intent of that group, as well as helping with public outreach, et cetera. But be great to get an update on that at some point. Just two quick questions for you. So one, and I'm sure you left your crystal ball at home, Jennifer and Anna, but as far as you can tell, some of these positive trends that we're seeing, I mean, sure, we're getting back to work and school, as you mentioned, but do you see any hope that some of these positive trends that we're saying may hold? And then second of all, on the tree giveaway, and then the gift from Amazon on those gift tree giveaways, I'm wondering, can we target areas in the city that does not have as much tree canopy as other parts of the city? Versus, I mean, don't get me wrong, I appreciate we get out as many trees as possible, but if we could have an enhanced or a real focus on those areas that especially as we've learned with this dramatic heat and what those 3 days for folks that didn't have any type of tree cover, it would be so great if we can target those areas specifically, maybe a little bit more aggressively, to plant more trees in their immediate neighborhood.
Yeah, so on the tree giveaway, we are really interested in trying to target those neighborhoods with lower tree canopy, and we're in working with our partner 300 Trees, I think they've done a couple tree giveaways and have had a little more demand than supply. So we're sort of anticipating something similar, but hoping to have enough trees for everyone. But yeah, we are looking at doing some targeted social media posts and advertisements in those neighborhoods, and working with a consultant to reach out to some community groups in those areas. So yeah, we are very interested in trying to focus in the neighborhoods with lower tree canopy. And then let me think, now I'm forgetting your first question. Sorry.
It was the one about which positive trends do you think might hold, despite getting back to somewhat normal?
Yeah, sorry. Well, I was told not to make predictions of the future, but I think one thing I would say was, I think there's a lot of organizations and companies, that are starting to transition back to work in the office. It does look like the hybrid style work will become a bit more of the norm than the exception. But I think that kind of remains to be seen how that plays out with organizations and employers in Bellevue. But and then what impact that has on our vehicle miles traveled. So I think that's one big one. And then I think just these sort of big changes in sort of our daily routines, I think, are also an opportunity for people to kind of reset how you get to work and just different choices you make. So I think even if people are, going back into the office 5 days a week or whatever, I think, we may see some shifts in transportation behaviors. So I think, it's something we're definitely interested in and monitoring with the transportation department, but don't really know for sure, except for kind of anecdotally what we're hearing from different organizations.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, very, very good presentation and comments so far. I am interested in that we were having quarterly instead of yearly, quarterly updates, and I'm just not quite sure what quarter we're reporting on here. It sounds like we're talking about 2020 basically, and that's 6 months back. And I guess, it's just an amazing amount of information, and we're tracking all of this, but I'm hoping that we move forward and actually, and maybe it's going to take a better, from the council and the city, commitment to this, including more than just a couple of staff, and hopefully the environmental stewardship initiative, particularly if we get some more people, more, I think, personally, more rounded group into that, and there are other people to be involved in it. But it's, you know, and I understand best practices are always good, but best practices kind of sometimes get that way because everybody says it's the best practice and you don't want to do what everybody else is saying. So I would like us to look at what's it going to take for us to really actually do something more rather than just report on it and be more academic as opposed to, and that may take a big shift, but what is, I think, scary is that we just read the paper about what's going on in Eastern Washington and in California. I mean, we may not have, I don't know, we may quit drinking wine. It's getting a lot worse. And if we're doing this every year, a report, if we're kind of going along, we're not sure what quarter we're in and what's happening now. And it's more reporting on what has happened as opposed to what we can do. And I think it's just the way we've set it up. So I'm not, you know, being critical of what anybody's done, us, the staff or council or you know, and all on this, but I just think that to me, this whole thing says we're doing a lot of work, but are we being effective in this time in our history? Because, you know, maybe somewhere down the road, we won't even be here to do this. So I just hope we can take a look going forward this year and getting the community more involved. How do we, like we do in other areas, we don't just study it and have some programs, but we actually do things that affect progress going forward and get it out of more of the academic and into the action, which I think, you know, we have staff that are very, very strong and capable of doing that. I'd like to see us work harder to put this at the top of the list and do something, because this will affect us on everything else and it messes up everything else. So I'm just saying, I really appreciate this. I think it's a great report. I'm glad we're having more of these, but we're kind of always kind of following, you know, a few steps behind. And let's just think in terms of how do we really go big in this one? Because this is a big kahuna when it comes down to it. So I really appreciate the work, and I'm glad to see all this reporting and how it all ties together. And it was very good to get the, you know, take on the pandemic. And the pandemic, and it's so hard. I know you're looking at it and saying, what happened last year? What does it really tell us about what's going to happen in the future? Because it's such an odd situation. But anyhow, I think we have the grounding here. I just want to see us actually make this something that we get real hard, good results in down the line. But
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's great to see all the dashboards, all the numbers, all the status, all the reports. I think the staff's done a great job, you know, trying to gather data and see where we are. But, you know, the question is, you know, somebody, I think the Deputy Mayor mentioned crystal balls. Crystal balls doesn't get things done. You know, we don't know what is going to lead us. And I think they describe appropriately though, because things change. COVID-19, you know, the pandemic is one thing that changed the picture. So we are moving in a sort of a moving target. So when I look at the dashboard, when I look at the numbers, and I'm sure a lot of public we have seen the last few years, they've been looking at numbers. They've been getting good reports from us, but they are not seeing actions. Things are not happening. I think we need to put more efforts on action. You know, one of the action I believe is, you know, what the city's doing. That's something we can control. When are we going to get our fleet electrified? When are we going to do the green building, whatever, things that's under our control, so people can see what we're doing, regardless of what dashboard is, what data means. You know, just a whole bunch of numbers. Many people look at the numbers that you show, you know, you see trends. You know, if you refer back to the charts, there's arrows going down, arrows going up. And I heard that some arrows means we're making progress and some arrows were going backwards. So what are we looking at, right? So I'm just wondering, it's really confusing. That's why people are coming to the council meeting. They're asking, what are we doing? What are the actions? What progress are we making? That's why I think the city council, at the last budget, we responded to that. And I think the staff is responding very well to it. But I still feel that instead of having a bunch of predictions, trends, we talk about, Janice mentioned 2030. That's just a few years away. And we're going to shoot for a target of 50%. We are now at 18%. We were at 20%. So what does one mean? I don't know. When we get to 2030, what does it mean we hit 50%? Are we going to get there? What's going to happen in between that may change the picture, the situation? So really, I don't know. What does it do for put us into where we are making progress or not making progress? So I really like to see having some real concrete actions, what the city can do, what we are actually putting in place, what we are actually putting in charging stations, changing the electric fleet. So regardless of what, we are there. Okay. So it's good. It's good to have all this information, knowledge, but it's challenging to keep it clear, straight, people understand it. And at the end of the day, what does all mean if we don't see any actions? We're just going to adjust the numbers. Well, because of this, the numbers change. Well, this numbers go up, it's good. This might go down, it's bad. So let's decide. We know what they are, whether it be planting trees or changing better, reducing emission or whatever, or let's get something done. Set those as goals, and that will not change. That will not, have a relative value, whether it's good or bad. But we actually accomplish things, and ultimately, those are the things that make a difference. So I really like to have the city council working with the city manager, the staff, and what does it take to get our fleet changed? What does it take to have policies made that the buildings can be greener? And we need more staff, more people.
Councilmember Lee, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Okay. So I from all the council members, I sense a sense of urgency and wishing that, we could make some dramatic change, because we're seeing dramatic change in our environment. I'm really excited about your technical support consultant. I appreciate that you're bringing somebody on board, and I think that's going to be really helpful, especially managing the building energy usage, which is a huge draw on our power usage. But I'm wondering if somebody could weigh in on when will the council have another chance to reassess and maybe set new goals, not just completely start over, but maybe make some revised goals. Would that be at the mid-buy, Mr. Miyake, or what do you think?
Sure, Mayor and council members, that's exactly what I was thinking of, because what I'm hearing right now is desire to move faster with more actions and moving ahead, which will cost more additional resources in which to do that. So that would definitely, in terms of from a funding perspective, be relevant during the mid-buy conversation. It's either adding more resource, taxes, that kind of thing, or making some trade-offs and not doing something else.
All right. Well, so that'll be good to have that conversation. The other thing that I wanted to ask on my own is that I hear most from the residents of Bellevue, the alarm when a new house is being built on an old lot and all the trees come down. And I know we've spoken with you about this before, Jennifer, and you said we would have to change our codes in order to make a change in that. And I'm just feeling, don't you feel like that's kind of an important thing to work on, or is there a reason why you think that it's not as important as other people do?
I think we think that's definitely important. And I think we've heard from the community that that's a priority. I think the challenge is, that's kind of one of a number of code and policy updates, in a mix of some other big code and policy update work, that's happening now or planned to happen soon. So I think it's definitely noted as a concern and a priority. And it's part of the sort of enterprise priority discussion and prioritization of different projects.
All right, so maybe we can add that into the conversation at the mid-buyer. That'll be my input. Councilmember Zahn, did you have more that you wanted to say? I thought I'd give everybody another chance here.
Actually, Mayor, I just really appreciate my colleagues supporting being proactive and considering adding more resources to move faster and with urgency, because I agree with the comments my colleagues are making about the fact that while it's been amazing, and I think it's setting up the framework with the dashboard and the measurements to help us understand, now that we have that in place, it is time to move with much more urgency and more resources and partnership, whether it's with the business community, with our residents and our community, to move as quickly as possible. And really, as Councilmember Barksdale talked about, with leading indicators so that hopefully people are able to make decisions about how to improve or how to reduce their own environmental footprint, and really take advantage of this opportunity coming out of COVID to truly move forward in a different way in the very behaviors and habits that we're making and those choices that get us towards that greenhouse gas reduction 50% by 2030. Thank you.
Okay, so anybody else like to have a comment or a question? Otherwise, okay.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking about policies, actually doing something. One of the quick, easy examples, which I just happened to be talking earlier, is, like banning of a gas blower. It's a simple, straightforward thing. That's just an example. There are many, many opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you very much for the presentation and for the hard work you're doing. Really do appreciate it. Looking forward to hearing the next update. And I'm going to give us a break here. It is 7:42. Let's come back at 7:52. I'll see you then. Please introduce the next land use.
Yes, Mayor and council members. The next item is a quasi-judicial rezone titled the Sunset North Lot 10 rezone. Given the quasi-judicial nature of this particular item, I'm going to turn this over to Nick Malasinos, our Deputy City Attorney, to introduce the item. Nick?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Good evening, Council. As Mr. Miyake indicated, this is a Process 3 quasi-judicial land use matter, which means the hearing examiner makes a recommendation and the Council makes the final decision. The hearing examiner has recommended approval with conditions, and there was no appeal filed. Tonight, Council will have the opportunity to ask questions related to information contained with the administrative record of the hearing examiner. Before I turn it over to Mr. Folsom to give a presentation and an overview of the rezone application proceeding, what I do want to do, Mayor, is suggest that since this is a quasi-judicial matter and therefore subject to the appearance of fairness doctrine, that each council member be given an opportunity to disclose on the record any ex parte communications that they may have had with any person supporting or opposing the project. To most efficiently enable council members' disclosures, staff have searched all emails received at council@bellevue.gov and individual council city member email addresses. Therefore, council members need to only disclose any contacts received other than through city accounts. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, I'll do that right now. Councilmember Zahn, have you had any ex parte communications?
None.
Deputy Mayor?
None.
Councilmember Barksdale?
No, I have not.
Councilmember Lee,
I have not.
Councilmember Robertson,
None for me, thanks.
Councilmember Stokes,
None.
and I have not either. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. With that, I turn it over to Mr. Folsom for the presentation, and Matt McFarland is also here if there are any additional questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Mayor Robinson and council members. I'm here tonight to present background information regarding a request to rezone property located at 3002 139th Avenue Southeast. As Deputy City Attorney Milisanos explained, this is a quasi-judicial process 3 rezone. As part of the land use process, the application in question was presented to the hearing examiner as a recommendation for approval with conditions by the Development Services Department on June 3rd, 2021. The hearing examiner concurred with the DSD recommendation and issued his recommendation of approval with conditions on June 11th, 2021. No appeal of the hearing examiner recommendation was received. General information. It's a rezone from office limited business to Eastgate transit-oriented development and includes clarification and or modifications regarding the applicability of concomitant zoning agreements associated with the property. For SEPA, the current proposal is within the scope of the previously approved comprehensive plan amendment and is relying upon the final SEPA threshold DNS issued on February 12, 2015. Council adopted a comprehensive plan change from office limited business to office limited business / Eastgate transit oriented development via ordinance 6250 on August 3rd, 2015. The clarification to and modification of the existing concomitant agreements before council in connection with this rezone was envisioned when the CPA was adopted. The rezone is warranted because of a need for additional transit-oriented development, including multifamily residential development, within the proposed land use district classification. The proposed zoning classification is appropriate in order to allow reasonable development of the subject property. Vicinity. The property is located at 3002 139th Avenue Southeast in the Eastgate suburb of the city. It's west of the Bellevue College and north of the Sound Transit Eastgate Park and Ride. Site description. The site is approximately 7.2 acres and is within the Eastgate subarea of the comprehensive plan. The site is located north of Southeast 32nd Street and will gain access via Southeast 32nd Street. Currently, the site is undeveloped except for retaining walls and a gravel driveway located in the southern area of the site. The topography in the southern area of the property slopes significantly downward from east to west, and the vegetation within the disturbed area is grass and shrubs. The remainder of the site is heavily vegetated with trees and shrubs and contains steep slopes, wetland, and a mapped stream as well as potential unmapped streams. No development or disturbance of the property is associated with this rezone. Any proposal for the redevelopment of the property will require a full analysis of critical areas and habitat within the site. Public comment. Notice of the application was published on December 3rd, 2018, and a public meeting was held on January 15th, 2019. Staff received comments via emails from citizens. No public comments were submitted to the hearing examiner or made at the public hearing on June 3rd, 2021. All comments and responses from the applicant and staff can be found in the project file. Comments submitted concern transportation impacts related to the proposal and concern with existing traffic conditions and potential impacts of the proposal. This application is for a non-project related rezone. Any future development will go through design review process and a SEPA project level review. Additional SEPA review of transportation impacts will be part of the project level review of future development. At the request of the city, the applicant submitted a traffic analysis memorandum by the Transpo Group dated February 2nd, 2020. The memorandum analyzed proposed impacts to 4 intersections and determined that the proposed rezone would not be expected to result in a degradation of service. Transportation impacts and mitigation for any specific development proposal for the site will be determined based on the transportation impact analysis that will be prepared at the time of project level review. A further discussion of the transportation impacts and analysis of the memorandum can be found in the staff report on pages 8 through 9 and the hearing examiner report, pages 33 through 34. Zoning and land use. The staff report, which is included in the record, provided a zoning comparison between the current office limited business zoning and the proposed Eastgate transit-oriented development zoning. The most notable differences being floor area ratio, height, and allowed uses. The differences in dimensional standard and allowed uses between OLB and EGTOD are lessened by lot coverage limitations, lower grades in surrounding residential properties, existing tree canopy, and use limitations. Office use will not be allowed on the property. Decision criteria. The decision criteria for the rezone approval found in Land Use Code 20.30A can be found on pages 9 through 12 of the staff report and on pages 34 through 37 of the hearing examiner report. In summary, the rezone will promote redevelopment and revitalization of an existing site and provide increased housing opportunities in close proximity to Bellevue College and the Eastgate Transit Center. The rezone will provide an opportunity for increased housing stock and will help address the housing and jobs balance envisioned by the city's long-term planning. It is warranted because of the need for additional property in the proposed land use district classification and because the proposed zoning classification is appropriate for reasonable development of the subject property. Concomitant agreements. Proposed rezone area is 7.2 acres. The original area regulated by rezoning ordinance 4010 is 82.36 acres. Concomitant agreements. The applicant proposes to amend, clarify, and/or modify certain provisions in the concomitant zoning agreements, CZAs, associated with the property, 7.2 acres, as allowed as part of the rezone process per Land Use Code 20.30A.120. Ordinance 4010 rezoned an 82.36 acre area in the Eastgate area, including the property. CZA 14633, dated June 6, 1989, was included as an attachment to Ordinance 4010. The CZA was subsequently amended on June 1993 by CZA 19271 and November 11, 1995 by CCA 22416. The applicant seeks clarification and/or modification to several CZA conditions for the property. However, the CZA conditions will remain in place and in force for other properties located within the 82.36 acre area. The applicable conditions of the CZA's proposed modification and staff recommendations are discussed in the staff report, pages 13 through 24. Further discussion of the concomitant agreements and hearing examiner findings can be found on pages 4 and 5 of the hearing examiner recommendation and on pages 27 through 28 and pages 38 through 50 of the hearing examiner report. Recommended conditions. Staff recommends the council approves the rezone with conditions found on page 25 of the staff report, which is page 50 of the hearing examiner report, and is adopted by the hearing examiner recommendation on pages 5 and 6. Conditions of approval include authority of rezone and the application of concomitants 1, 16, and 18. And note this rezone does not approve any design and construction of proposed development. Process. The proposal is a site-specific rezone following the Process 3 framework for decision. Process 3 decisions are quasi-judicial decisions made by the council. Staff is here to answer questions regarding the land use process. And that concludes staff presentation.
Okay, thank you. So this is our first look at this. It's going to come back to us on August 2nd. Are there any comments or questions? You can raise your hand and I'll call on you. Councilmember Stokes.
So we're not going to have any discussion?
You may start, you can start the discussion.
Okay, just want to know. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good presentation, and I think it's clear that while this doesn't directly make any physical changes in this specific property, it does enable changes to be made to the property going through additional land use action. Is that correct?
Yes, that would, it changes the zoning to EGTOD from OLB.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, and no one seemed to have a concern about it in the public and all. I just, but I mean, it's more of a technical piece in the long run, because the other actions that may affect it or will take place with another land use action. So it's not just something that will change it dramatically by itself. Is that correct?
Well,
I mean,
but I would I would refer you to the staff report, which would be essentially, if you want to find the consistency with the land use code, is I think it's pages 32 through 34 of the staff report, and it compares within the hearing examiner report. It compares the differences between the OLB current zone and the proposed EGTOD zoning, and the dimensional requirements and what those changes would entail.
I think to Councilmember Stokes' point, we're not approving any development. We're just looking at the potential for change in development with this. From
Mayor,
office to, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say that's exactly right. This isn't a project level review with respect to what development could be put on the site. And one thing that I would point out to the council that Mr. Folsom mentioned in his presentation is this rezone, and the hearing examiner mentions this in his decision, or recommendation, I should say, as well, is that this would align the zoning for the property with the comp plan designation also, the underlying comp plan designation. So Councilmember Stokes and the mayor are both correct with respect to what the effect of this rezone is.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to have it brought back.
Thank you. Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. I think that staff just covered this, but I was going to say that the Eastgate I-90 corridor land use and transportation study from way back when that this council adopted into the comp plan 6 years ago. When we did that, and this is a question for staff because I want to check my understanding, we adopted a new comprehensive zone map into the comp plan that had this area zoned comp plan designation as the Eastgate TOD. Is that right?
For this property in question, its current zoning its current comp plan designation currently is OLB/Eastgate transit oriented development, that within the comp plan.
So it's both, because it was formerly OLB, but it could be Eastgate TOD, right?
Yeah. The comprehensive plan amendment discussed in the staff report labels it as OLB/Eastgate TOD. So it doesn't. It's in the comprehensive plan. It's that designation. It's not.
It can be either. It can be okay.
Correct.
And we didn't get the staff report, Drew, so it wasn't part of our council packet. So when you refer to that, it doesn't. I haven't read it. So this rezone, which of course was not appealed, just takes that zoning, the Eastgate TOD, and makes it that, right? Except for a couple of concomitant agreement provisions.
That's correct, Councilmember Robertson. The application for the rezone was requesting the change from OLB to Eastgate TOD, and then to also provide clarification with respect to the concomitant provisions, because the concomitant agreements cover a much larger area of land than just the 7-acre area. And so that was the two-pronged request with the rezone application, the change from OLB to Eastgate TOD, and then also clarification regarding the concomitant conditions.
Okay, I think that's really appropriate and is consistent with the comprehensive plan. I personally, apart from this application, would like to see the city slowly but surely get rid of all the leftover concomitant agreements. But that's another story. So I'm very comfortable with this, and Thank you for the briefing and the clarification.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think Councilmember Robinson asked the question. My question would be regarding the Eastgate Transportation Study. Does that study, or did that study include this parcel of land? And did it consider what transportation use or analysis was considered or done on this? That's first question. Second, you mentioned the Transportation Department did a transportation study, right? Okay, so I assume transportation study indicated approval, right? Because to me, the biggest question to be addressed when you make this change is transportation system for the whole area. So 2 questions. What does Eastgate Transportation Study, what did it do? How did they look at this? And second, what's our transportation analysis, like for this current requested study?
So as far as our transportation review department did review the rezone proposal, and then the applicant prepared a transportation analysis by a private group, the Transpo group, to also analyze the proposal. So both of those reviewed the proposal.
How about the first question?
So your question on the
Eastgate Transportation Study.
So I would have to reference, for me personally, I'd have to review the technical aspect of the report, of the hearing examiner report, to, because I'm the land use reviewer. I've read the report, but I'm not familiar enough with that specific question to answer it in this setting.
Okay, I would assume that the current transportation study is more appropriate. Right. But I just want to have a history. If it's Eastgate study says that this is all compatible, consistent with the, the park and ride and all that Eastgate transportation system to Bellevue College, it's all consistent, then I'm in much firmer ground. But if it isn't, I think the Transpo study would have to consider all that. I would like to make sure that it is, consistent and compatible.
We make sure that the council members get a copy of the transportation report or study that was done. And if you already gave it to us and we didn't find it, maybe you could make it easier for us to find.
Yes, I will follow up with staff.
And all of that should be in the project file that was lodged with the hearing examiner record. So if council doesn't have that readily available, it certainly should all be in front of council before they make a decision.
Yeah, it's hard since we're remote. I think. I mean, I always prefer those big things to be in person looking at them. But we'll have to make sure, maybe the clerk can make sure we can all access those materials easily.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, all of the items, staff report and background file, are located in the council doc library.
And the entire decision is based upon the record, on the closed record that's within the hearing examiner's record.
Right.
If you answer my question, it would be a lot more direct, easy, straightforward. Thank you.
So I'm just going to say I'm excited to see more opportunities for housing and transit-oriented development. So this sounds like a great idea to me, and I'll be looking forward to August 2nd when you bring it back. Are there any other comments or questions on this? Okay, seeing none, I think that's all we need to do. We don't need to vote on anything. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to, we have 3 ordinances, I think. Where
Yes,
we have an
that's right.
ordinance and 2 resolutions. How's that? Go ahead,
Correct.
Mr. Miyake.
Yeah, yeah, 3 items under other ordinances and resolutions. The first one is Ordinance 6579, which amends the Land Use Code, Chapter 20.20 General Development Requirements, and Chapter 20.50 Definitions as applied within the East Bellevue Community Council's jurisdictional area to establish lower minimum parking requirements for certain housing developments within 1/4 mile of frequent transit service. And just by way of background, on April 26th, the council adopted Ordinance 6575, which amended the Land Use Code to establish lower minimum parking requirements for certain housing developments near frequent transit service areas, I believe within 1/2 mile. Subsequently, on May 4th, the East Bellevue Community Council held a public hearing and voted to disapprove the Ordinance 6575 passed by council earlier this year. Ordinance 6579 in front of you this evening amends provisions in Land Use Code as applied within the East Bellevue Community Council's jurisdiction area to establish lower minimum parking requirements for certain housing developments to achieve conformance with state regs. So joining us this evening for our brief staff report are Trisna Tanis, our consulting attorney, and Christina Gallant, senior planner. Trisna?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Nieuwenhuis, council members. I'm Trisna Tanis, consulting attorney for Development Services. With me is Christina Gallant, senior planner for Code and Policy, also with Development Services. Thank you for having us tonight to provide this brief presentation on a LUCA for reduced parking minimum standards for housing developments located near frequent transit, as applied to the EBCC jurisdictional area, as City Manager Miyake mentioned. Next slide, please. We are asking for council tonight to adopt this ordinance number 6589. Next slide. For the agenda, we will begin by first explaining the objective for this LUCA. We'll then go forward and talk about the components of this LUCA and then describe the process that we've been following for this process for legislative action. And lastly, we'll be repeating our ask of you tonight. Next slide, please. As council may recall, 2 state legislations, this is Substitute House Bill 2343, and were enacted at the end of last year's legislative session. This first one modified an RCW, which required cities like Bellevue to have conforming regulations by June 11th of last year. So council had passed an interim regulations to quickly conform city code while permanent regulations are being developed. In addition, the second state statute is RCW 3678-698. And that was in regards to off-street parking requirements for ADUs, again, located near frequent transit. So this particular RCW was needed to be met by July of this year. So council adopted permanent regulations to respond to both statutes on April 26th, again, as Miyake mentioned, through Ordinance 6575. However, this ordinance was disapproved by the EBCC in their May meeting. And as such, this part of the city is out of conformance with these 2 state statutes. The ordinance that's in front of you tonight is to bring the EBCC area into conformance with both of these RCWs. So next slide, please. I am going to now turn the presentation to Christina to explain the components of this ordinance. Christina.
Thank you, Trisna. As mentioned, tonight we are here with a LUCA specifically to amend Land Use Code sections 2020 General Development Requirements and 2050 definitions as they are applied to the EBCC jurisdictional area to establish lower minimum parking requirements for certain housing developments within 1/4 mile of frequent transit service. And so specifically to differentiate from the previous ordinance, this LUCA would impact the radius that is applied in the EBCC jurisdiction. So as a reminder, our previous ordinance introduced a 2-tier system for transit frequency. We have a lower frequency tier where only affordable housing is eligible when located near a transit stop, and a higher frequency tier stops with service at least 4 times per hour, including future light rail. And In the higher frequency tier case, eligibility expands to all multifamily and senior housing for reduced parking requirements. And under the previous ordinance, we had applied a half-mile radius, which would continue to apply outside the EBCC jurisdiction. This LUCA would establish a smaller quarter-mile radius for those stops located within the EBCC jurisdiction. And so here we have two maps showing a comparison of the eligible stops and their radii under Ordinance 6575 and what those would look like on the right with this ordinance. And so in purple, we have shaded the radii that are different with this LUCA. So as you can see, there is a quarter-mile distance applied just within that EBCC jurisdictional boundary. However, the yellow area shows, and the yellow doesn't overlap the green on the left map, so you can't quite see, but the yellow areas are the areas where it's the lower frequency tier, only affordable housing is eligible. And this LUCA would not change the ratios that were established with Ordinance 6575, but as a reminder, again, we have two frequency tiers. Affordable housing is eligible in the lower tier at 0.75 spaces per unit. That drops to 0.5 spaces per unit when there's more transit frequency. For market rate multifamily, it's 0.75 spaces per unit. And consistent with the state regs, this would remove the minimum parking requirement for senior housing in the higher frequency tier. With that, I will pass it back to Trishna to walk through the LUCA process to date.
Thanks, Christina. So as I noted at the beginning of our presentation, the objective of this LUCA is to conform the regulations as they are applied to the EBCC jurisdictional area to the state regulations. So this ordinance is specific to the EBCC because the citywide regulations are already conforming through Council's adoption of Ordinance 6575 on April 26th. Along with other provisions, Ordinance 6575 set different tiers of eligibility for frequent transit service, as Christina mentioned, either 1/4 or 1/2 mile. And on May 4th, the EBCC held a public hearing on Ordinance 6575, and after the public hearing voted to disapprove the ordinance. The result of the EBCC disapproval decision was that Ordinance 6575 was not effective within their area, and also means that the applicable land use code in the EBCC jurisdictional area were not in conformance with RCW. So on July 6th, however, the EBCC adopted Resolution 592, which clarified their rationale for this disapproval. And in essence, the EBCC said that their disapproval was limited to the eligibility threshold of 1/2 mile instead of the 1/4 mile that is required in the RCW. The EBCC also stated that they would approve new lower minimum residential parking requirements consistent with Ordinance number 6575, provided that eligibility is based on a 1/4 mile rather than 1/2 mile of frequent transit service. So tonight, Council is being asked to consider and to adopt this ordinance that would be applicable to the EBCC area. On August 3rd, if Council does adopt this ordinance, the EBCC will hold a public hearing and be asked to approve the ordinance. So next slide. So again, the ask tonight is for Council to adopt ordinance number 6589, and we are available to answer any questions Council may have. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any comments or questions on this? You can raise your hand. Councilmember Stokes, followed by Councilmember Barksdale.
Yeah, my question is, listening to this, if I were not really up on what all this means, and if I was sitting out there in the audience or whatever, I would not have any idea as to how we arrived at this and what the state law provides or doesn't provide, and how this compromise in effect is or isn't acceptable. Can you just make it clear to the public that what was mandated and what's permissible in the state law, and then how does that relate to what we're acceding to with East Bellevue Community Council.
Yes, of course. So Council may recall this, and forgive me if I'm being repetitive, but the state statutes essentially place the ceiling on the minimum required parking that cities can impose. And the ceiling is different at different sizes. So for instance, studios and one bedrooms, we were at 0.75 was the cap, but they also allowed for a higher level if it's one bedroom and two bedrooms, three bedrooms, etc. Council did elect to go with the tiers that Christina had just gone through, and we can put that slide back up if it's helpful. But the part that is maybe at issue tonight is the definition of eligibility of frequent transit. The state mandate is for 1/4 mile of frequent transit, and there are different tiers for that frequent transit. Also, affordable housing is 2 or more times per hour within a 12-hour period in a day. Market rate housing, housing for seniors and housing for people with disabilities, you would need 4 or more times per hour within 12 hours in a day to be eligible for frequent transit. In addition to that, there's a radius that is required. A 1/4 mile is what state regulations mandated. Council had elected to go with a larger radius to be 1/2 mile, and to consider light rail, even if their opening is later in time, because of the certainty that light rail provides for that frequent transit. So there are a number of different differences that Ordinance 6575 had with the minimum requirements that the state regs had. But the issue tonight, or the EBCC issue in particular, is in regards to the radius.
But the question is, from the public, is the state statute allowed us to go to do it in both areas, but it was permissive, it wasn't mandatory.
Yes.
And EBCC is willing to put this in effect and require this in one category. And we're saying that's okay.
This ordinance would vary the regulations in the EBCC area in regards to that radius.
But it doesn't violate the state law.
Correct.
Okay. Just to make clear, because I've had some people ask me about that. I don't know how they heard about it, but they were confused about it. So just to make sure that all of this, we're making an adjustment that's within the confines of the legislation.
Yes.
Okay.
If it's helpful, we do have a number of places within the land use code where the regulations that are applied to the EBCC differ from those that are citywide. So this would be one of those instances where there would be a difference in regulations.
Right, but if the legislature made this the rule, then we would have to comply. They wouldn't be able to change it.
They made the 1/4 mile the rule, and
yes.
We increased it to 1/2 mile.
If the state mandated a 1/2 mile.
No, they mandated a 1/4. I mean, sorry, 1/2 mile. You're right. And wait, I'm getting confused. No, they mandated a 1/4 mile, right, Trisna?
Yes, they mandated a 1/4 mile. You were right the first time.
Okay, and then they increased it to we increased it to 1/2 mile, and the EBCC wants to go back to the minimums that the state required.
That's correct.
But the state gave us the ability to make the change, but it was not mandatory. Okay, I mean, I'm just, from a layman's point, as a layperson's point, it seems confused, but it makes sense. And so we're not doing something that is with outside the law, this effect. Because I've had a couple of people say, wait a minute, how can that happen?
Councilmember
Snow, I think it's clear.
Matt McFarland, Assistant City Attorney. At its most basic level, this ordinance would bring the EBCC into compliance with state law. Currently, the EBCC is not in compliance with state law. And when council chose to expand the radius from a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile, that was a policy decision that council is certainly entitled to make. So the city jurisdiction outside of the EBCC is in compliance with state law. And if council were to adopt this ordinance, then the EBCC would also be in compliance with state law too.
Yeah, thanks. That helps a lot. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Barksdale.
I just had one question, kind of building on Councilmember Stokes' point about in layman's terms. Can you just provide some context about what the practical implications of a 1/4 mile versus a 1/2 mile radius is or are?
Christina, do you want to, should we put the map? I know it was somewhat small and you may not be able to see it. There's, practically speaking, we feel it's negligible in terms of the differences, but we're happy to put that map back up if it's helpful, Councilmember Barksdale.
Just a moment, Trisna, I can share.
It's okay. I was more interested in your response to it, but either way.
So this one kind of shows just the small areas that are in white that would not be eligible for the reduced parking because they're not within the radius. But I think it's, practically speaking, to your question, Councilmember Barksdale, it's really the underlying zoning or land use district that is underneath this that may tell and even kind of the story here, because the white areas are not necessarily multifamily land use districts. So the application of these regulations wouldn't really be there anyway. So that's the practical reality.
Thank you.
So Trisna, to clarify, maybe it wouldn't apply to those areas because they're not multifamily, but if there was a boarding house type situation in one of those areas, it would apply there, right?
Yeah, so the residential types that are kind of in play here are multifamily, a market rate multifamily, as well as housing for seniors and for people with disabilities. Boarding houses and rooming houses are classified differently, so they would not be part of this kind of ordinance.
Okay, good clarification. Thank you.
Of course.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. So no, I support doing this. We need to have the whole city be in compliance with state law, and with EBCC's veto of our prior ordinance, that area of the city was out of conformance with state law. So as much as I would like us to have a single uniform rule or policy citywide, this is the best we can do. So I am in favor of moving forward. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Is there a motion, Deputy Mayor?
I move to adopt ordinance 6589, amending land use code chapter 20.20 general development requirements and chapter 20.50 definitions as applied within the East Bellevue Community Council's jurisdictional area to establish lower minimum residential parking requirements for certain housing developments within 1/4 mile of frequent transit service.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you. So now we are on to one of two resolutions, Mr. Miyake.
Good evening, Mayor Robinson and council members. Resolution 9972 authorizes the city manager to execute an agreement for the Plymouth Housing Group / Eastgate Permanent Supportive Housing Project in the amount of $400,000. This was last in front of council last week, and at that meeting, council reviewed the funding request for the Plymouth Permanent Supportive Housing Project and directed staff to return with legislation to award the $400,000 in supplemental funding. Joining us this evening for a brief staff report are Matt Cummins, our director, and Mio King, assistant director, and Lindsay Masters, arts executive manager, all from Community Development Department. Matt?
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. I think I'll just hand it off to Assistant Director King to walk through some of the details here. This is, Council has now seen this a couple of times, most recently just a week or two ago.
Thank you for the introduction, City Manager Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis, members of Council. Staff are here tonight to ask for Council action on the $400,000 allocation of supplemental funding to the Plymouth Permanent Supportive Housing Project in Eastgate. As the City Manager mentioned, Council did discuss this funding opportunity on July 12th and provided direction to come back for action. This funding award will advance city policy objectives to create a 95-unit permanent supportive housing project with preference to serve homeless individuals referred from Eastside shelters while leveraging state, county, and local funding partners. This investment, when partnered with these other funds, will address time-sensitive needs and continue to show our city's continuing commitment to housing. With that, I can turn it over to you, Mayor.
Okay. Are there any comments or questions on this? This is certainly something that we discussed earlier. I see Councilmember Lee and I see Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, that's another project I'm very proud of Bellevue. This is a project that we have been very careful and thoughtful in coming to a very important realization of providing affordable housing for our residents. And, I fully support this effort. One thing that, however, during the discussion on this topic a number of times, I'm very impressed of the Plymouth Housing and the Eastgate, permanent supportive housing project. They have done a good job and they've proven to be very conscientious about providing supportive services. I think that's very important. This question we have today is capital CIP. I think that's great. There's no question that we have it, we can do it. And but more importantly, it's the supportive services that we have to provide. It takes, again, thoughtful, careful consideration and engagement of the community. And I think we've done all that. So I'm very, very happy about it. And it's something that we must be, however, aware and conscientious that we need to continue because situations change, projects change, and the conditions change, the community change. And also, there would be other requirements. There would be additional funding grants, and that would be in consideration. To do all that, it takes, again, the community to get together, support it, to move forward, to maintain the thoughtful, the careful way that we have done it. So I believe that the council have, wanted to make sure that we can continue this engagement, this process, this operational expectation that we have for the project we're doing. And so I want to make sure that the city staff and perhaps the city manager can bring back to us how we can make this happen. How can we?
Okay, Councilmember Lee, we're talking about capital expenses right now.
I understand.
So let's keep the conversation to capital expenses that we're approving or not approving. And we can talk about what you're going to talk, what you, and I know Councilmember Robertson has an opinion on this as well. I'd like to hear that after we discuss the capital expenses.
So that's why you're hearing it. I'm not saying it. Okay. I hope it reflects the rest of the council's.
Anybody else who wants to talk about the task at hand, which is approving the capital expenses to Plymouth? housing.
Mayor?
Councilmember, okay, Councilmember Robertson, you had your hand up first, then Councilmember Stokes.
Thank you. No, I wanted to thank staff. Last week, I think it was when we last discussed this, I had asked for additional information about what was in the agreement, and they provided to me, and I feel very comfortable with this agreement and with Plymouth. They're a great partner. I would like to, maybe after we have this vote, just to ask staff a couple questions about future work plan.
Okay.
Because I know we have the 1590 next week, and we have the supportive housing interim official control the following week. So I want to just ask what to expect on that. So, but I'm happy to wait till the end of after this vote, but then can I talk again? It'd be great.
Yeah. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited about this and absolutely will vote for it. And I think we've set it up in a very good way. I think we have good plans for it. I'm also very pleased to, after having worked on getting something like this together for, I don't know, seems like forever, but almost a decade now. We have a very good operational, alignment on this, and I think it's something that is very important, and it actually ties in with what we're doing and what we're doing in other areas in terms of addressing these needs in a very positive way. And it's just like the stars have finally aligned, which we've been working on for a long time. So I'm excited about it. I'm ready to vote for this amount and move forward.
Okay, Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. I am also excited to vote in support of this. I did have one question. I see Lindsay's here. Earlier when we had the ESP discussion, there was discussion about the early adopter incentive to help with energy efficiency. So is this one of the projects where we'll be able to get some help from those advisors so that what gets built is as efficient as possible from a total cost of ownership and energy usage of the tenants?
Apologies there. Would you mind repeating that question? I was trying to sort out something with my Zoom settings that a child had messed with. So apologize.
Sure.
If you could just repeat
Sure.
that.
Maybe this is just a comment that in our environmental stewardship update, there was discussion about support for early adopter incentive for building energy efficiency. So I'm just putting that out there as hopefully that would be a resource that this project would also be able to take advantage of if we are putting those resources into place.
We would be happy to follow up and try to make that connection.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? I know that I personally feel like I said everything I needed to say last time. I'm very supportive of this capital expense. So if there's no other comments or questions, is there a motion?
There is. I move to adopt Resolution 9972, authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement for the Plymouth Housing Group Eastgate Permanent Supportive Housing Project in the amount of $400,000 to be drawn from the city's housing fund, G-109 Affordable Housing Contingency, sales tax revenue specific to affordable housing or a combination thereof as determined by staff as guided by the recommendations of the Arch Executive Board.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Now, Councilmember Roberts, I know you and Councilmember Lee and maybe others have some questions you want to ask about behavioral health funding or something. So you go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I had talked with staff last week and was advised that this is the time to talk about the work plan going forward. As you know, I wanted to make sure that as we're using 1590 money, as we're using our Arch money, as we're using additional resources to make sure that we have the type of behavioral health and supportive housing projects that the people living in Bellevue and around the area need, we want to make sure that these projects are really, really successful. And so I asked some questions, I think a couple meetings, last meeting and then one prior to that, about the requirements for the grant funding. So we have next week, I don't know if this is the right time, but we have the 1590 program recommendation. I'm looking at our council calendar. And on the 2nd, we have a public hearing on the interim official control on supportive housing. So I'm wondering, there's a couple of questions I have for staff that I'd like to see get addressed in the work plan. The first is with regard—
so before you do that, here's what I'd like, because really I'd like to see a consensus from the council on this request, but I'd like you to bring it up next week at council business and new initiatives. If you could get that on the agenda, okay, and present it to the council and with your requests, then we can determine as a body whether we want to pursue answers to those questions. Okay. And then you can make your pitch.
That's fine. I don't know to what extent some of these things are already in the work plan. So that was my question for staff tonight was, are these in the work plan? And if not, then I'm happy to follow our procedures and actually print something in the packet for my colleagues to look at so that we can get a vote on the council. But with regard to the land use provisions on how we might regulate, if we even can, these types of facilities, I'm wondering if that is going to be part of the IOC work plan. And that's a question for Mac.
Is that something you can work out with staff after the meeting and during the week and figure what's already there and what you want in addition?
Well, I'd like to
Mayor,
hear a couple answers.
If I might jump in.
Very quiet tonight.
I think if I might jump in, Mayor, we've had a couple of conversations and heard some ideas, but we probably don't have a total list yet of some of the things that Councilmember Robertson might be interested in bringing back to the council next week. Some of those items likely are contained already within the work plan, but some may not be, and some may require additional analysis, or legal work. So maybe if we could just work with Councilmember Robertson to get that list, we could provide a more holistic answer, at next week's meeting for you all.
That'd be great.
Okay, so what's the procedure then? Am I going to ask this question next week, or are we going to get the answers in the meantime and then put it on the agenda for next week? Because I don't, we're almost on August break.
I think need to do is refine your question and then bring it back as a new initiative, and then we'll see if the council supports that with a vote.
Well, I'm very unhappy with being muzzled tonight because I wanted to ask these questions online, but I will defer because apparently that is the way it's going to be, even though it's only 8:45 and this is our last item.
Well, it's not on our agenda. This is about capital expenses, this conversation we're having right now. And I think you have
this conversation about these grants for months. So that's fine. You know what? I'll just shut up.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. I'm trying to give you space to do it in, just not tonight, but next week would be great. Council members on.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps my comments might, I don't know if it helps or makes it more confusing. It was because I was recused from the 1590 grant discussion tonight, or I chose to recuse. I didn't get a chance to bring it up there, but I would also like to understand what is in that 1590 proposed funding and allocation, because I do think that we really need to understand the unmet needs in our community and what type of funding we're going to need.
Council members on, are we talking about behavioral health again?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to bump that to next week.
Yeah, I guess my only point was that Councilmember Robertson is not the only one that when this topic comes up that might have questions. And so I would recommend that we allow staff, as you've said, to bring the item forward so that we can have discussion based on what they have.
Well, okay, now you're asking for a consensus from council, because that's what I'd like to get next week is a consensus. And I'd like to give Councilmember Robertson an opportunity to articulate what it is she wants to pursue. And I'd love to hear everybody's feedback, because I think we all have opinions on that. I'd like to bring that up next week and not tonight.
I agree. I was actually trying to agree with you. Sorry, it didn't come across that way.
All right, thank you.
And Mayor, I would like to have that before the meeting, not bring it to the meeting. And so we have some leeway to study this and maybe ask questions of staff ourselves.
Well, actually, the vote next week would be whether or not we want to pursue that, Councilmember Stokes.
Well, but I would like to have, just to make it clear, the opportunity to see what is being recommended and have a chance to ask questions of staff before the meeting. Just, that seems fair.
Well, I think Councilmember Robertson said she would get it in the packet. So you'll have the chance to do that.
Yeah, I always print things in the packet if I'm going to put it on for council business,
Well,
and I would intend to do so.
Any other comments or questions on that? Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, I have always expressed that my desire to do a good job when we do this. And I support this, obviously, the CIP we just passed. But I just want to make sure it's going forward. And so I brought out a number of times, and I expected and I thought that the staff has been working toward that resolution and coming up with some of the discussion that I'm interested in. And so I appreciate Councilman Robinson, wanting to look into that. And I believe the mayor has some interest in that as well. So I would love to be, hearing from the staff. I don't have all the answers, but the staff, like Max said, they already have.
Councilmember Lee, we'll determine how far we'll go down that path.
What I'm trying to say is I need to be involved and prepared to understand what we're going to be doing without unnecessarily delaying it. That's the whole point. We're doing a great job. We're going to have the building, everything going on. I do not want it to be delayed.
Mr. McCommon, do you have a comment on the procedure of this?
For me?
All of us.
No, for me.
No, thank you for asking. So, Mayor, you've articulated a venue in which the conversation can happen. The council has a chance to consult the staff for any research that would help advance that conversation. The council can certainly weigh in and decide what its consensus will be going forward on this topic.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you. All right, Deputy Mayor, I'm going to hand the gavel to you now and recuse myself for the next resolution that Mr. Miyake is going to introduce.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. All right, now the mayor is left. I'll turn it over to Mr. King. Do you want to introduce resolution 9973, please?
So, yes, resolution 9973.
Sorry, City Manager Miyagi.
Yeah, I got what you meant.
Yep.
Resolution 9973 authorizes execution of a recoverable grant agreement to provide the King County Housing Authority $4 million in the form of a contribution toward the acquisition of the Elahi apartments. Joining us this evening to answer any questions you might have. We've had a significant conversation about this already, is Matt Cummins, the director, Neil King, assistant director, as well as Lindsay Masters, Arts executive manager. Matt, I guess I should just turn it back to you, Deputy Mayor, if there's any questions before you take action.
No questions right now.
Call for the vote.
Well, I thought Mr. King wanted to introduce it further, or if not, then we can certainly take a vote now.
No, I think we're just here to answer any questions you might have on this one.
Okay, I don't, but I'll look to my colleagues if there are any questions at all on resolution 9973. All right, seeing none, then is there a motion?
I'd like to move the motion as presented.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? It passes. Very good. Well, I believe that's our last item, City Manager Miyake, unless there's anything else.
No, there's nothing else. Appreciate it.
Okay, great. Well, everybody have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next Monday.
Mr. Mayor, are you going to give everybody a $10 salary increase while you're still the mayor?
Put that under consideration under new business.
Thank you.